and it's 2:01. So I'm actually going to get started. I'm going to spotlight me just so you can see me while I do these the beginning announcements of our webinar. Welcome. We are so glad you are joining us for the next hour for Talent Management for All, the Hebrew calendar, strengthening our skills as Jewish community professionals and as a tool for Jewish engagement. My name is Marcus Young. I'm Director of JResponse at JCC Association of North America, and I'm also a proud member of our professional development collaborative team. For today's session, we will hear from Amanda Herring, Director of Jewish Life and Learning at the Edlovich DC JCC. More on Amanda in just a moment. A couple of announcements to get us started. This webinar is the 8th in the talent management series. We started back in November, which we're highlighting one of our 22 talent management characteristics. For descriptions and links to recordings of our first 7 sessions, please connect with Yael Warak. Yael, you can put your name and email in the chat, our professional development manager. We will also send recordings of this session and all previous sessions in our post-session email to everyone who registered. And we'll also have them soon available on our JCC Association Resource Center, kind of our next level of jcca.me that we hope to get to you soon. During the session, you will be muted, or if you haven't muted yourself, please mute yourself, and use the chat box to answer questions posed by Amanda or myself, or if you have questions, even not during the Q&A part, feel free to put them in the chat. You can put them to everybody, or if you want to be confidential, you can just put it to me, Mark Young, the host, or to Amanda. We can try to address them. We'll monitor it, so if you have any questions, post them there. There'll also be time for Q&A and discussion at the end of the learning. And to get us started today, I want to set the stage with some mindfulness guidelines. And if you've been on a Talent Management for All series, you've heard many of this, and we want to reiterate them because we think they're really important. They're really important. One, for this next hour, as much as you can be fully present. Give yourself this time to disconnect from other distractions as much as you can working at a JCC. But if this hour can be just for you and your learning and growth, give yourself that gift if you can. Respect the experience of others. We're all coming to this work from different paths and experiences and should respect each person's perspective. Some of this may be very new to you. Some of it might be review or somewhere in between. But we hope you all learn and grow from this hour. Be attentive to your body. There might be ideas that are new or unfamiliar. Maybe they're stressful, doubtful, but maybe, that maybe give you some tension in your body. Any time during this hour that you just need to take a breath and relax, please do so. Lead with curiosity and not certainty. You may hear things that spark your interest and propel you to explore deeper. We hope you do. Expect mistakes. Hopefully we won't have any technology mistakes over the next hour, but if we do, or in any of the content as you begin this work, it's new. And allow ourselves in general to make mistakes and just to learn from things as we go through them. And expect non-closure. Like a lot of the times in this series, there's new information for many of us, so we're not going to get everything we wanted to get done in this hour necessarily on this topic or any of our topics. It's a 1-hour session. Consider this as a commencement to this topic for ongoing learning experience or a continuation if some of this is familiar to you already. And we hope you join us for future sessions as they build on each other. So stretch if you can, get comfortable, turn off distractions, take a sip of water, and now we're going to get started. I want to add something, though, before I introduce Amanda formally, as our aspiration to add a bit of Jewish learning and wisdom framing to our conversations. Amanda, though, will be engaging us in meaningful and accessible Jewish content throughout our hour. So I just want to emphasize that this session, different from some of our other sessions on business writing or staff supervision, it's equally, if not more so, intentional in strengthening our talent skill sets as JCC pros, and why it's also intentional that Jewish engagement is one of our 22 talent management characteristics. Regardless of our role at our JCC, we all have a role to play in engaging our communities Jewishly, and there is so much wisdom in Jewish tradition that enable us to do our work better. And Amanda will guide us through both of these objectives throughout our hour. So now with this framing, I'm going to briefly introduce Amanda because then she can also introduce herself. Amanda is the Director of Jewish Life and Learning at the Edlovich DC JCC and co-creator of the Jewish Planner, I just want to highlight that she's previously worked for the Brandeis Collegiate Institute, Hillel at Virginia Tech, and at One Table. She'll say more about herself, but I'll just add that I had the pleasure of meeting and studying with Amanda this summer during the Hadar Institute's Jewish Wisdom Fellowship. She and I studied together in the Torah of Reopening cohort, and I have just been so deeply impressed and inspired by Amanda's creativity and, frankly, brilliance. So she's awesome. I think you're going to feel that way too after this hour, and I'm confident that you're going to have a really wonderful session. So Amanda, with that, on to you, and I will spotlight you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for that welcome. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here and taking this time out of your day. I hope that you find it useful and interesting and engaging. We will do some breakouts at the beginning of this session so that you get to meet some of the other people in the room. If your video is off and you're listening, then that's fine. You don't need to participate in the breakout, but I hope that you are listening in. Again, my name is Amanda Herring. I'm the Director of Jewish Life at the JCC in Washington, DC. I've been here at the JCC for a little over a year and a half. I am the creator of the Jewish Planner. I find myself to be quite a Hebrew calendar nerd, so I hope I get to share some of that enthusiasm with you today. And as Mark mentioned, I've kind of moved around in the Jewish community. I had the pleasure of working at the JCC in Boulder in my graduate school field work, and I just love the JCC communities, and I'm really excited to be a part of this larger JCC network. Here's how this session is going to go. We're going to start by seeing where we are right now in the Hebrew calendar, kind of tapping into how that fits into our work, how that fits into our lives. Then I'll do a middle section that's like really step by step. What is the Hebrew calendar? How is it laid out? How is it different from this Gregorian calendar that we live in all the time? And then the last section will be, how do I use this as a tool in my work? How can you use this as a tool in your work? And some like workshopping, brainstorming. I have this idea. How does this work with the Hebrew calendar? And hopefully we can all help each other in that ending section. So if that sounds good to you, I'm going to dive into where we are right now by sharing my screen. And we'll present it, the Hebrew calendar. Okay. Right now, if you didn't know, we are in a month called Elul, which in this circular layout of the Hebrew calendar, you can find right here. It's the end of summer. Hopefully, wherever you are, it's been warm for the past couple of months. It is long days of sunlight, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. And for many of you, you probably know, because we have some days off work coming up, we are just before this month of high holidays of Rosh Hashanah, of Yom Kippur and Sukkot. And this year they all kind of fall just after the weekends. So we do get a lot of days in our calendar where many of our buildings are closed. So that's fun. So there are hours. The hours, we're just past the summer solstice, which means that the hours of daylight are decreasing slowly, though they're still very, very long. And it's the end. This calendar was developed to be for an agriculturally based system. So this would be close to the end of harvest season. And we'll dive more into that when we do detail on the Hebrew calendar, but just know that it's near the end of the harvest season for an agriculturally based society. If you map this calendar onto the life cycle of a people or of an individual, I've seen it said that spring is like rebirth. It is newness. It is childhood, like those really young years. And that summer is more like adolescence, more the Jewish people in the stories of the Torah that we read are getting the rules to live by, which some people might call the Torah. They're getting some structure, and there's definitely some like pushback against authority, which often happens in adolescence. So right near the end of that adolescence period, think about like maybe having a bar mitzvah or going off to college, different forms of ending adolescence that we have in society. We're like right on that brink. So imagine the excitement of going back to school or the excitement of leaving your childhood home for the first time. That's kind of the excitement of the month of Elul for me. It's this change in seasons is going to come. We're kind of resetting, analyzing where we are. The month of Elul that we are in is known for waking up, preparing, and individual accounting. Many people in the Jewish tradition use Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the services, the liturgy, for an individual accounting. And the month prior to that is time to like really take stock of the last year and say, where did I miss the mark? How do I want to be different in the year ahead? For a good analogy to the Gregorian calendar, it might be like December 31st. You know, what are my New Year's resolutions? How do I want to be different in the year ahead? In the annual cycle of reading the stories of the Jewish people, this is the point in the Torah where we read Moses's final speech to the people. Moses is saying like, here's all the things that happened. Don't forget, here's all the things that happened and here's all the lessons that you learned. Keep thinking about it. And they're just on the brink of entering the land of Israel. In the month of Elul, there's a tradition of hearing the shofar. You'll see a shofar behind me. It is a ram's horn. It is supposed to be a sound that wakes up your soul. Maybe it mimics sounds of like wailing, crying. It's said that the shofar could break down walls. So the shofar is heard every day in some communities during the month of Elul as a way to prepare yourself spiritually for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In the last week of this month, there's extra prayers added if someone was to be doing a daily prayer service, extra prayers of penitence, of forgiveness. And there's this nice little acronym for the month of Elul, which in the Hebrew letters is Aleph Lamed Vav Lamed, which might stand for I am my beloved and my beloved is mine. And it's this idea that we as a Jewish people are very close to the divine in this month, very close to the thing that connects us all to one another. I have some quotes from one of my favorite books for this time of year, which is Rabbi Alan Lew's This Is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared. It is a whole book about this time of year in preparation and of the high holidays. Would anyone want to read one of these quotes? Just go ahead and unmute yourself. Or raise your hand if you can't do that.
Every person must prepare himself for 30 days beforehand with repentance and prayer and charity for the day when he will appear in judgment before God on Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, let every person scrutinize their actions with a view to mending them. Let them exclude themselves for 1 hour every day and examine themselves.
Yeah. So there's this like tradition maybe of doing like an hour of meditation every day this month. Very, very like, you know, hip to the modern era, right? Does anyone want to read one of the other two?
Many men in time observe silence between the advent of Elul and Rosh Hashanah to effect the purification of their souls.
The idea of a silent retreat for this entire month. That's interesting. I like that idea. And the third one.
During Elul, one should devote less time to study and more time to fixed periods of introspection and self-evaluation.
Look at that. There's a rabbi suggesting that we study less. Very interesting. Study ourselves more and study traditional texts less. I like this quote here, this word teshuvah, which means to some forgiveness, return, refresh, coming back to understanding who you are. The ancient texts say, in what case do we know that someone has done teshuvah, has really repented? And Rav Yehuda says that in the case someone encounters the same situation where they erred the first time and the second time they escape from it. So unlike Lucy in Charlie Brown, who continually misses the ball, it's learning from what you've done in the past and acting differently when presented with the same situation. I just love that. We're going to go to chavruta, which means partner sharing or small group sharing. And I want you to think, how is this month showing up in my work? How is it showing up in my life? Is this time before fall, before school starts, before high holidays? Is it a time that you typically use to prepare, to panic because high holidays are coming or school is starting, preschool, whatever it might be? How does it show up in your life and how does it show up in your work? Do you feel that like back to school excited feeling, or what comes up this time of year? And we'll return in about 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll ask you to share at the end if someone else in your group said something that resonated with you.
Amazing. So there's 10 groups, and there'll be 3 or 4 people in each group. And we'll give you about 10 minutes, so please join. Amanda, if you head to a group, come right back.
Okay.
Button. And we're going to have everyone back right about now.
Hello, hello. Welcome back. I think everyone who's going to be back is back. As I said at the beginning, if you have something that someone in your group said that like sparked something for you or resonated with you, I'll just take 2 or 3 quick shares before we jump into the like learning about the Hebrew calendar. And I will share that in my little group, Denise was so inspiring that she is bringing in new staff at this time of year, and that they set like, you know, their ideas for the year ahead, and they write them down on this beautiful poster that they decorate. And it was such a connection with this month of like setting your intention for the year ahead. Anyone else hear something in your group that was resonating with you?
I'll maybe prompt somebody else to share. If I share too, I'll just share that I was chatting with who's my friend in Raleigh. Where are you? Where are you? Gina in Raleigh works on PJ Library and uses this month a lot to see how we can support other people and children, and not only with their reading, but also with food. And there's a lot of giving that happens in Elul. Gina, I'm not giving your sharing to me justice, but I was very inspired with what you shared. So thank you so much. And if anyone else wants to share, now's a good time.
You can also type it in the chat if that feels more accessible. I'm going to go back to my slide. And as I said, we're going to get to some real like nuts and bolts learning here. And please feel free to put questions that you have in the chat, and I will try to get to all of them. Okay, baseline Hebrew calendar. The first kind of misconception that I like to address is that every holiday is almost always on the exact same day every year. So unlike what you might think, it's not like, oh, the holidays are early this year or they're late this year. They're always actually on the same day in the Hebrew calendar. The Hebrew calendar shifts on the Gregorian calendar, which is why it seems like they move around. But in fact, Passover is always on the 15th of Nisan, and Rosh Hashanah is always on the 1st of Tishrei. So it's actually really easy to keep track of if you know that their Hebrew date. The only time that the day would shift for some holidays is if it's, for instance, a fast day, that it would be really difficult to prepare for Shabbat if you were fasting. And so sometimes the holiday will be shifted by one day in either direction to avoid falling on or just after Shabbat. Most of the holidays, this isn't true for all of them, but it is a nice little rule of thumb. Most holidays fall on the full moon, actually. It is a lunar-based calendar. Some fall on the new moon, like Rosh Hashanah. The new moon is when the months begin, and the full moon is the middle of the month, which is usually like the 15th. Things to know, like little to big. We'll go with the smallest increment first. The days, maybe they'll pop up. Oops. Okay. The days begin at sundown and end at sundown. So a lot of times we'll talk about like Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Kippur. And the reason that there is a Erev of every holiday is because it starts the night before on the Gregorian date. Sundown to sundown is the day. And that is because in the beginning of the Torah, it says there was evening and there was morning the first day. And so therefore, day begins at night. And that's why things can be confusing, because like the first of Tishrei might be the evening of September 6th and the day of September 7th. And so if you simply list the two on like the same square on a calendar, you're like, oh, but does it start the night before or does it start that night? And that's where things get a little tricky. So just know that the Hebrew day begins at sundown. Very important. And the Hebrew calendar week is very focused on Shabbat. After 6 days of work, there is a day of rest, Shabbat, which is Friday night to Saturday. And that is day number 7. And that restarts this weekly 7-day cycle. The months, as I mentioned, begin with the first glimpse of the crescent moon and last a full lunar cycle. So imagine in ancient Israel, before calendars and hebcal.com and Google, that you wanted to know if the new month had started. You would look at the sky, and if you could just see the moon, it started. And then there was a tradition that at the first glimpsing of the new moon, there would be like a signal fire lit on this mountain and that mountain, and then that's how everyone would know that the new month had started, because they saw the first glimpse of the new moon. That's why it's not actually on the new moon, because you can't see anything at the new moon. It's when you first glimpse the crescent. That's the new month. In the Hebrew calendar year, there are 12 months, just like in the Gregorian calendar. But because the months are a day or two shorter than the Gregorian calendar, because the lunar cycle is 28 days, there is a 13th month that is added every 2 to 3 years. That is a leap year. And that keeps the Hebrew calendar adjusted to the solar cycle. If it was a strictly lunar calendar, then all of the holidays would continue to shift back and back and back and back and back by about 24 days each year, like for instance the Muslim calendar, where the holidays kind of shift seasonally back and back and back until they come back around. The Hebrew calendar, because it was for an agriculturally based society, had to have the holidays in the time of the harvest. So you couldn't have Passover, the beginning of the barley harvest, in winter, because there would be no barley to harvest. So every 2 or 3 years, there is a leap month in order to keep things on track with the seasons. When does that leap year occur? It's every couple of years. It's an extra month of Adar right before Passover, because Passover is the beginning of the harvest. So that would correct it to the harvest. And it used to be that it was decided based on like, is the harvest ready? No. Okay, let's have an extra month. But when everything got formalized, because the Jews were dispersed across the diaspora and had to have one calendar, not like a let's add the month now calendar, It was formalized on a 19-year cycle with the leap years at year 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, and 19. Super easy, right? That's probably the most confusing part, is this 19-year cycle. But we are entering a year that has a leap month, and just know that it's about every 2 or 3 years. On a larger frame than the year cycle, there is a 7-year cycle, which I definitely want to highlight here because we are about to enter the 7th year. Each year is part of a Shemitah cycle. Shemitah is the origin of the word sabbatical, which you may have heard of. It's this concept that academics need a year to travel, to write their book, to kind of refresh their brain and keep that academic mind going. And it comes from this concept that the Jewish people had in their land, that while there are 6 days of work in the work week, and then everyone needs a day to rest and reset and take in the work of your hands, that the land too, as an agriculturally based society, had 6 years of being worked, of being planted, of being harvested, and then it needed a 7th year to rest. There's very interesting implications around this Shemitah idea. I could do a whole hour on Shemitah, but just know this. 1, we are entering a Shemitah year. It is the 7th year, 5782. So I would love to talk, if there's time at the end, about how your organization wants to acknowledge that, how you personally want to acknowledge a year of Shemitah. 2, that many Jewish environmental organizations are really embracing this idea of Shemitah, that the extractive processes of continually harvesting land has been proven to be really detrimental to topsoil, to water retention, and that it's actually like with crop rotation and everything, that it's a really good idea to let land rest in order to retain its nutrients. And 3, that there's many things around this 7-year cycle, even if it's not this specific year, but maybe there's the idea that every 7 years that you work at an organization, there's some reset, you get to pick a conference or retreat or professional development that you get to go to. There's a lot of ideas here around doing a reset, doing a refresh for yourself every 7th year, and how can we embrace that as a Jewish concept? Finally, there's this huge 50-year cycle, which is every 7 cycles of 7, where every 7 Shemitahs, there is a 50th year that would be the Jubilee. It was this like whole society reset. It hasn't been observed since the ancient temples were destroyed, but I just like to throw it in here because there is an even bigger 7 cycle there. There's a mnemonic that I made for remembering the order of the months, because I never learned them in Hebrew school, but the order of the months in the Hebrew calendar, I say this cycle keeps time, Shabbats and new moons, it shall turn around endlessly. And that's the cycle of the months. And if you can come up with one that's easier to remember than that one, I would love to hear it. Okay, let's do some Hebrew calendar understanding here. And I'm going to ask you to type in the chat if you know the answer to one of the questions that I'm asking. And then I'm going to annotate this so that we can get a better idea of what's going on in this here calendar. 1, what month has the new or the new year in it? Which month has the new year? Type it in the chat bar if you know it. It's very soon. Tishrei, thank you, Tishrei. Great. So Tishrei, let me annotate again. Awesome job, everybody. Tishrei is down here at the bottom of this calendar. Trick question, Tishrei. So this is the first of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah, the new year that we all know. Trick question, where is the other new year in the Hebrew calendar? Nisan, thank you. So Nisan right here is the second new year. So in the Torah, when they're counting the months, they actually call Nisan the first month because Nisan is where we have Passover right in the middle of the month. And Nisan is the new year for the Jewish people. So the new year for the Jewish people is when they escaped Egypt and there's a refresh and a new start. It's also the end of the rainy season, the beginning of the harvest season. Nisan is also a new year. So here we have two opposite points of refresh in our calendar. Great opportunities for, like, say you come up with a list of goals for the year at Tishrei, revisit them at Nisan. Are they still your goals? Are you meeting them? There's a really cool spring and autumn offset here. Trick question. What are other New Year's in the Hebrew calendar that we're missing? Anybody know? Tu B'Shvat, awesome. Tu B'Shvat is right here. It is known as the new year for the trees. So in an agriculturally based society, you would count how old all of your trees were by the 15th of Shvat. That is the new year for the trees. And lastly, boom, we have the new year for the animals, which we just had. The new year for the animals was 1st of Elul, and that was for counting how old all of the animals were in your agricultural system, which lets you know, keep count, and also when they were ready for weaning or for slaughter, whatever it might be. So New Year for the animals can also be when I worked at the JCC in Boulder, which had a very lovely learning farm. It's a great day to go out and celebrate the animals that you have. It's like a little birthday for all the animals on the farm. All right. Does anyone know which holiday is the only one that spans 2 Hebrew months? Your hint here is that, yes, Debbie, amazing, so quick to it. So right here, Hanukkah is the only holiday to span 2 Hebrew months. And I love this little fact about Hanukkah. Hanukkah falls at the longest, darkest night of the year, because Hanukkah, the way that the calendar is set up, always falls at the new moon closest to the winter solstice. So it's the longest, darkest night of the year is when we are reminded to bring in reminders of light and warmth and light candles. Very important. And we have like reminders of darkness here in the lightest time of the year. So it's a really nice balance. So most holidays, like I said, fall on the full moon, which would be the middle of the month. Hanukkah crosses 2 months because it's right at this really, really dark time. Imagine if you were outside in winter at a new moon, it's very, very dark outside. Okay. Agriculturally, this calendar here is broken up into a rainy season, which is like this half, and a dry season, which is this half. And I'm gonna extend this all the way to the middle of Tishrei because the prayers for rain don't start until just after Sukkot, which is the middle of the month. So on the dry season side of the calendar, this is time for harvest. It's hard work. There's lots of hours of sun. You're outside all day in an agriculturally based society. And there's also these big, massive festivals. What are the festivals, the holidays where like everyone in the community would come together for really big festivals? Does anyone know what happens in the harvest side of the calendar? We already mentioned we have Passover right here. What else happens on the harvest side of the calendar that are big gathering festivals? Type it in the chat if you know it. There's 3. Sukkot, yes, that's going to be right at the end. That marks the end of the harvest. Boom. And Shavuot. Shavuot happens right here. So there's these big kind of markers in the calendar, 3 harvest festivals that are the times that in ancient Israel, all Jews would come to the ancient temple, pilgrimage festivals that are like the anchors to this calendar. On the harvest side, there was like long hours of sun. There is reasons to gather and celebrate like abundant harvests. Now imagine what's happening on the rainy side of the calendar. It's pretty much the opposite. It's hours of darkness. There's more holidays about storytelling and gathering indoors. So important things that happen on the rainy side of the calendar is Hanukkah and Purim, which is this later story about the Jewish people surviving when people were trying to kill them. So let's see a couple more things about the calendar, and we'll move on to how this comes into our work. People spend a lot more time inside in their regular lives on the rainy side of the calendar. And so it's just good to keep in mind, like for me as someone working on a team, that Hanukkah, this like peak of darkness and insideness and maybe sorrow if people have seasonal depression, that there's this reminder of light and warmth here. And it's also a lot of times when you have maybe a staff party or something to like really show your staff that you appreciate them. So that's just like a peak winter pro tip. Finally, I just want to note these periods of time. So from Passover to Shavuot, there's a period called the counting of the Omer, which is a period of 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot, which can be a time for spiritual growth, but also agriculturally a time from the beginning of barley harvest to the beginning of the wheat harvest, when people were praying that it doesn't rain because it would ruin all of their harvest. There's this period of time from Tammuz to Tisha B'Av, which are 2 fast holidays in the middle of summer. That's like the peak of bright and heat and light, when it's like a reminder of darkness, kind of opposite of Hanukkah. And there's these minor fast holidays that I just wanted to highlight quickly, which span the cycle of the year. There's one in Tevet, which remembers, this is on the cycle of the ancient temple being destroyed. Tevet is when the siege began. Tammuz, so this is like the resources were cut off in Tevet. In Tammuz, the walls fell down. In Av, the temple was destroyed. And in Tishrei, Tzom Gedalia, this is when the last remnants of Jewish sovereignty were lost in the city. So these other markers around the calendar. So we've got this awesome calendar. I'm going to clear everything and move on to how this shows up in our work. And I will take questions at the end if there's time. So how do I use the Jewish calendar in my work day to day? One, very simply, at the top of every newsletter that I send out, you'll see I just say, today is the 27th of the Hebrew month of Av. And then sometimes I give a little fact like, oh, this is the next holiday that's coming up. Want to learn more? Here's like a link to learn more about this. Today is the 11th of the Hebrew month of Av. A second way that I do it is I try to theme things around the month. So for instance, it's the month of Elul. I'm having a dog walk in the month of Elul. It's a Shabbat dog walk at a park. We're celebrating animals. I'm going to connect it to what's happening this month. Another like easy little tie-in to what's going on in the Hebrew calendar is that, sorry, I have to move this so I can see my notes. That you might want to think about scheduling preparation for a holiday on the Hebrew calendar. So for instance, if this year Passover fell in March, and then you're saying, okay, next year we need to remember that we have to book a caterer in January. Well, that's not necessarily true depending on how the holidays shift on the Gregorian calendar. But if you say we always need to look at and search for a caterer for our Passover dinner on the 1st of Shvat, and you look up the 1st of Shvat for the next 3 years and put that in your calendar, then you'll always have exactly enough time to get ready for Passover. So those are just like a few little small examples of how the Hebrew calendar plays out in my work. Another example is that every single day on the Gregorian calendar is the day on the Hebrew calendar. So simply stating at the beginning of a staff meeting, at the beginning of a smaller team meeting, like this is the month of Elul. This is a time of reevaluating. Let's take some time as a team to reevaluate how things are going and step back. It's just a really lovely way to bring that Jewish to your Jewish community center that's accessible to everybody. If you're starting a swim class on, the 1st of Cheshvan, you might say the month after the high holidays is a month to really follow through on all of your New Year's resolutions. So this swim class, like you're starting a new chapter, we're all going to learn to swim, and we're going to learn a new skill this year, and you're going to be here every single week. And so we're really going to follow through on those intentions. And so welcome to the month of Cheshvan. I'm going to stop my share in this moment. And 1, take questions. And then 2, I can also brainstorm and talk more about the ways that I bring the Hebrew calendar into my work, but I'd also love to hear how you all have brought the calendar into your work. First, questions.
As people are thinking about questions, Amanda, I just want to make an observation as I unspotlighted you, so now we can all see each other.
Yeah.
The fact that the Hebrew calendar gives us guideposts that can help us as professionals reflect, improve, and then strengthen our work, right? So there's a lot of the what you call like the light, the outside months that, okay, this is maybe times that we should be experiencing joy and we should be getting out and maybe we should be innovative. And then this is a time right now of reflection. How do we incorporate reflection and planning in our work? Or I'm even thinking about Passover, right? That we do the cleaning, getting rid of our chametz. How can we metaphorically get rid of our bread and, take stock of the things on our work plate and reorganize in advance of going into Passover. So just all of these nice guideposts that can help us strengthen our professional approaches in addition to how we can share this with our JCC communities. So thank you. This is
totally. Yeah, as like a real meta reflection, like the way that we opened this session by looking at the themes of this month of Elul. It's the way that you can also start anything that you're doing with your staff, with your team, with your constituents at your JCC. I was teaching an Israeli dancing outdoor class a week or 2 ago, and I said, we're entering the month of Elul, and let's start by just kind of like shaking off the year that was, the year of pandemic, and starting in fresh with like what we want to be doing this year. Look at us gathering in community, having fun, listening to music, moving our bodies. It was just connecting. It's not, I think there's a caution to be like, I'm going to sprinkle in some Jewish to, something that isn't Jewish. And instead it's saying, no, today is Jewish. Today is a day on the Hebrew calendar. And that actually informs what we're doing today. And that is grounding, and that is helpful. And that when you can bring that into your everyday more often, that the holidays, the like stick out days, the ones that people know about, become less shocking or surprising. I feel like every single year I get the email that's like, did you know it's high holidays already? Or, oh my gosh, here comes Passover again. There's this constant panic versus being like, yeah, starting in Shvat, like we're already talking about Passover. We're getting ready for it. In Shvat, the the trees, the water under the ground is starting to melt. If you're in the Northeast, like the maple trees, they're rushing with waters and maple tapping is happening. And all of that is an indicator that Passover is on the way in 2 months. And it feels far away, but the calendar is constantly getting you ready for the next thing that's maybe far away, that's maybe time to start cleaning. And the same thing can happen in your JCC, that you're not surprised constantly or panicked constantly when it's like, oh, Av, the middle of Av, I'm already thinking about high holidays because it's time to start preparing. It's time to start thinking in a really calm and reflective way and not in like a panic. PJ Library Guru has encouraged you to plan for this event. Yes, I'm going to send out my slides 100% after this. And I can share other links to places for good resources. I know a lot of people use like the executive Jewish calendar for planning events, so that you have like if you like a paper thing, like a paper place to write out all of those things that you're planning and really know where you are in the Hebrew calendar every day. I also have like a big whiteboard calendar that I keep behind my desk. My colleagues will all tell you for keeping track of everything that has the whole year on it. Any questions? I know I talked a lot. Is anyone acknowledging Shemitah in the coming year in an interesting and cool way? I'm excited for the Shemitah year to do some focus and learning on the environment at my JCC. I think that it's a really cool time to connect to sustainability. We're going to be doing a sustainable Seder and talking about food and composting, and that will be really exciting. And I'm going to tie that into the Shemitah year and what's happening. Thanks, Stephanie.
Well, if Gina asked if you have a newsletter or if you have any other resources that you can share.
Oh,
You're getting a lot of compliments about your hanging wall.
Thank you. If you're referencing the newsletter that I showed clips of, that's my like JCC biweekly newsletter that comes out for my JCC. You're welcome to email me and I'll subscribe you to it so you see what events I'm doing at my JCC. But I don't have like a calendar newsletter at this moment.
Maybe this is the beginning of an innovation. I want to take a moment to thank you, Amanda, for enlightening us with so much depth that the Hebrew calendar can provide us. Some of us are people of other faiths, or some of us are people of Jewish faith that know very, very little about this part of Jewish tradition, or there's folks like me that know the Hebrew months but don't really know so much about Hebrew month, other than I know that Hanukkah's on Kislev. And now I have a sense of this flow, this integration into our lives, that the Hebrew calendar is just so intentional. And part of being a strong professional in our community is to maximize when there's intentionality there. And so much of it is just baked into the Jewish content, Jewish tradition, and the Jewish calendar the Hebrew calendar as you shared. So Amanda, thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for joining us for today's webinar. We had a really nice group, even though it's late August. As a reminder, this session has been recorded. We're gonna, edit it and make it all fancy, and then we'll share it with you over the next few days. We'll also send out a short evaluation so we can always improve our talent management for all webinar series. Our next webinar, I'll put this in the chat as well, will be on Wednesday, October 13th at 2 o'clock. Why not September? Well, there's going to be a lot of days where we're going to be celebrating some Jewish holidays, and not Elul, but Tishrei, as Amanda has reminded us. So we're not going to do a September webinar, but we have webinars planned for October, November, and December. For October, that's our date. It's going to be on the talent management characteristic of community and member engagement. We're just finalizing speaker, specific topic, and registration link. And when we have those ready, we'll send them out. They'll be in the pros brief. If you don't get the pros brief, let us know, but that should be going out to almost, if not all of you. And really appreciate your time. Again, thank you, Amanda, and wishing all of you, however you celebrate, Good rest of Elul, reflective time, and a Shana Tova Mituka, a sweet start to your 5782.